Welcome to the 20th episode of SecuriTEA Crumpets, where we host security professionals each month to talk about different security topics. Today, I am delighted to have Tanya Janca on the show. Tanya has worn many hats. She is a startup founder, a pentester, a CISO, an AppSec engineer, and software developer. She is a renowned author, award-winning public speaker, active blogger and streamer, and has delivered hundreds of talks and trainings on 6 continents. She sits on multiple advisory boards and is currently the Director of DevRel at Brightsec. Welcome, Tanya. Welcome to the stream.
Thank you so much for having me, Lewis. This is awesome.
Awesome. Last time we saw each other was in Tel Aviv, so that was a long time ago. That was, before the whole, pandemic and everything else. So it's great to see you again in a more professional setting.
I agree with you. Absolutely.
Cool. So like at the start of this podcast, I always like to ask, do a little icebreaker and find out like if someone was to come and visit like where you live, or I guess, and obviously that's in Canada, right? But like what would you recommend people to do / visit?
So I live just outside Victoria, British Columbia, Canada. And so it's on Vancouver Island, so not the city of Vancouver, which is also an awesome place, and you should also visit there. But I live on the island, just right near the bottom of it, the southern tip. And so Victoria is gorgeous. So I suggest, this is going to sound bad, but I suggest you visit as much of the island as you can rather than just staying in the city. There's so many beautiful things, like there's waterfalls, there's trees that are hundreds and hundreds of years old, where they're so big that even if you and I held hands, Lewis, we couldn't possibly put both of our arms all the way around the tree. Like we would need 3 people. They're so huge. So it's on the ocean, which is also gorgeous, but it's really cold. Don't go swimming there. We have many lakes that you can swim in. They're nice and warm, but it's so ridiculously beautiful. And I remember when I first moved, the highway to get to the city, there's like a part where all the trees go away and you just see this lake called Elk Lake. And it's where the rowers for Team Canada row and practice rowing. And there's signs that say, look at the road, not the lake, because there's so many car accidents because it's so pretty. Everyone looks there instead of the road. And so, yeah, it's quite gorgeous. And so just every single nature spot, every park you can visit, every waterfall or river or lake. Yeah, definitely.
That sounds magical. So my sister lives over in Perth, Australia, and I feel like it's kind of this, like there's just a lot of desert and sadness, but like if there are like a lot of beautiful places you can go to as well. But even though she's been there for 10 years, she still has not like done like a lot of the the non-touristy things you should do as a local, which is quite funny. Yeah. So it's nice to hear from someone, at least in Canada, that you actually are like appreciating the nature there.
Oh, absolutely.
Cool. So you have worked obviously in many different hats, across the realm of application security and development in general. Obviously, I've seen you in the realm of like the Twitter space and like in the community and all these different things. And obviously, I feel like you're a giant powerhouse when it comes to like getting people motivated about this sometimes boring field. So I would kind of love to hear kind of how your journey began, like where you started, like how things progressed, and like how you got to where you are today.
So I think that I might have a very weird journey compared to the average little girl who was born in the 70s. So both my aunts and 3 of my 5 uncles are computer scientists. So when I was little in the 80s, my uncle built me a computer that could talk to us. And then my dad taught me MS-DOS. And then by the time I got to high school, I took a programming class, and I was really lucky because there was this teacher named Mr. Ferguson, and he just loved programming. And lots of kids get teachers where they're assigned to the computer science class, but they do not love programming. And so I took all 3 years and I built crazy things. Like I play guitar. And so I built a like how to play guitar thing. And then I really like math. So I built a program basically that would test all the different math students at the same time, but they'd all have different questions and different answers so they couldn't cheat. And then I made it go, rah, 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 if you failed to like try to be motivational. My teacher's like, oh.
Yeah.
But I learned. Yeah. So then when I said to my parents, because I got accepted, so I'm good at school. And I got accepted to every program I applied for. I got like lots of awards and stuff. And they're like, what do you want to take? I'm like, I think I want to take computer science because I like my classmates the best of all the different people. I'm like, these are the people that I feel like I really jive with and like I would love to work with all day. I remember like I got accepted to the dramatic arts program in a bunch of different schools. And I was like, but then I'll have to just like scream and yell and murder all my classmates because they're so like it felt so intense to spend time with them compared to like the really relaxed computer science students. So yeah, so then I went to college and got a job at a startup while I was in college. And then I graduated, I started my own startup and it didn't work out, but I learned a lot. And I continued on as a software developer for a really long time. And I also at the same time would play music in bars. So I would sing and play guitar. I released several solo albums. So I'm Tanya Janca on Spotify and all sorts of other places. And then I was in all these punk rock bands and I would drum and play guitar and kind of like, I would joke that I was head wiggler because I would like wiggle and dance and scream and yell and jump in mosh pits, which a lot of people are like, really? Yeah. And so because I was in bands, I would go out and just like be really extrovert, meet lots of people, play music all the time. And so then one of my offices, there was a penetration tester and he was in a band and I was in a band. So instantly we were besties. And he, for a year and a half, kept telling me, you'd be such a good hacker. And I was like, software development's where it's at, dude. This is the best job anyone could ever have. It's the best job. I make something out of nothing every day. And for a year and a half, like he kept telling me, like, you'd be so good at this. It'd be really fun. Like, you should do it. There's lots of jobs. And he would come and speak to my dev team at lunch sometimes. I'd started this lunch and learn program because I wanted to learn more. And then I invite all sorts of people, not just hackers. But I ended up meeting most of the InfoSec community by inviting them to come speak to my 11-person dev team. And so then he was like, that's it. Like, please be my apprentice. Like you need to. So for a year, I apprenticed under him. And I like want to tell you a story where then it was like awesome and we're still friends, but he actually got really frustrated with me and told me to F off.
Oh.
And yeah, after like a year, basically he'd offered me a job working for him and I'd said yes. And then I got offered a much, 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 much better job. And I said yes to that job. And he was like, that's it, we're done, F you. And I was like,
Oh no.
I'm not gonna lie, I totally cried. I was really sad because I was like, I like this person so much. But I went on to find another professional mentor and another one and another one. And I joined OWASP and I loved that. And I started an open source project with my friend Nicole Becker. And I just kind of like, Louis, this might sound ridiculous, but so the Canadian dollars were so much less than the American dollar. And I've probably said the word about at some point. So people are aware that I'm Canadian because of my accent. And so whenever I'd want to take courses and learn, it would be so much money, like more money than I could ever dream of. And I didn't understand back then that I understand now. So Canadians pay way more tax than Americans do. So like if I wanted to take a course at one of the fancy, it would be 20% of my take home for the whole year. Yeah. Like it's like so much money. And I was just like, I can't do that. Like then I can never go out and I can't like eat at restaurants or anything for a whole year. I'm like, that's a big sacrifice for me.
Food
And
is
so I
great,
didn't want, right? Food's the best. And so at some point, this guy friend and my mentor, Sharif Kusa, he and I were running the OWASP chapter together. And he's like, maybe you should speak at our chapter. And I was like, yeah, you're crazy. No way. I'm just learning, right? He's like, there are a lot of people who are just learning. He's like, I've been doing this forever. So when I give a talk, it's always the people who've been doing it forever that come because as try as I might, I can't really do a beginner talk now because I have not been beginner for like 10 years, but you're a beginner and you keep complaining there's no female speakers and like, turns out you're a lady. And so you could be the lady speaker you keep searching for. And I was like, oh, I don't know. And then a bunch of them. So like the OWASP Ottawa people are so wonderful and so supportive and amazing. And they gave me ideas of what to talk about. And I was like, I'm going to talk about how a software developer could scan their web app with a dynamic scanner, find stuff, fix it, and look awesome. And they're like, let's do it. And so they let me present to them. They helped me like make sure that all my slides were factually correct. They stood there and watched and clapped and told me I did a good job when I finally did it. It was so scary, Lewis, because these are my peers. I care so much what they think. It's not like when I play music, it'd be in front of like, you know, a couple hundred drunk people. And so if one of them doesn't like it, I'm like, whatever, that's a drunk idiot. But these are like brilliant humans that work in my field who like know way more than I do. And I was like, oh my gosh. And so then, yeah, I didn't die, as it turned out, from nervousness. And then they're like, you should speak at another meetup. Like, you're really good at it. I'm like, no, I'm not good at it. They're like, no, you are. And so I spoke at more meetups, and then I applied to a conference, and then I applied to another conference so I could get in for free. So all of this was just a ruse because I wanted in free. I wanted to learn from all the other smart people at the conference. And OWASP really helped with that. A lot of the OWASP chapter leaders and project leaders can get a seat for free in the training if you can just get yourself there. And then I learned, just being a part of the community and contributing a lot of the people that give the training, they're like, of course you can have a seat for free. Like, they're just so kind, Lewis. They're so generous. Like, if you meet a project leader for OWASP, you just know they're going to be kind to you. And so, yeah, I just started speaking at conferences more and more and more so I could get in more and more for free and meet all these cool people. And then it turns out that's a job. There's a job to speak at conferences and write about your topic of choice called developer advocate, or some of us call ourselves dev avocados. I'm not sure exactly. So like, some people just put an avocado in their bio, and I'm like, I don't think that anyone else knows what we mean. I think they think we just like avocado toast, which is quite yummy, to be clear. Yeah, but so eventually I was traveling all around the world with Microsoft, and that was amazing. And then I decided to start my own company. And so I think we have more questions on that, but gosh, that's like such a weird, not common story for all sorts of reasons.
I got it. So that was a lot there. I loved the aspect of, you know, learning, like, especially when you were talking about like how you went from school and like kind of did that. What I did not know, that you did music and, you know, were in a band and did all this different stuff. That's super amazing. The one thing which kind of resonated with me at the start was like, you fell in love with like a teacher, well, not in that, in a professional sense, not in a romantic sense. And it was similar for me when I was in college. You know, like basically like learning like how TCP and UDP worked. This one professor at the time basically like pulled out a stack of printer paper and was like, handed me a piece of paper and was like, did you get that? And I was like, yeah, I got that. And then they grabbed like 6 pages and just threw them at me saying, did you get that? And I was like, no. And they're like, okay, that's TCP and UDP. And it was like, you know, like those kind of interactions on how, you know, like that kind of stuff just happens. It's just beautiful. And that kind of like led me into like, okay, this is, you know, you have really cool people who are just funny and goofy, and they, you know, are like, but they're really smart and they can like, you know, do things in a particular way, and how you kind of like evolve into that as well. So, and I also think you learned a life lesson hack early on. Well, I wasn't early on, but in your career, where a lot of people now do, you know, if they want to go to like Hawaii, they're like, okay, I'll just go apply to Locomoco Sec because that means I get a free or potentially free trip to Hawaii, right? So, you know, and, you know, okay, well, I know all my friends are in London, so I probably should just start applying to like AppSec, you know, Europe when it goes back to like close to Belfast or something, right? So, yeah, it's quite funny to kind of hear how you know, just slowly started to do that in your own kind of journey, but in a different way that you probably didn't realize was a thing until later down the line. Yeah.
I had no idea, Lewis, to be honest. And I also thought like, well, I'll never be qualified enough to speak at one of those things. And it turns out all of the other people there all started somewhere, and not all of them just came out of their mama a complete genius knowing lots of stuff. And they actually had to work up to it as well, and that's okay. And also that people do want to see beginner talks, and they do want to see intermediate talks, and they do want to see advanced talks. And I remember a lot of people advising me, no one's going to want to see this beginner crap, Tanya. And then I got invited to a lot of places because it turns out there's a lot of beginners. And Lewis, it's a huge issue now with much more experience of just how do we get all those new people into our industry? It's a big concern for those of us who have more seniority. We need them.
Exactly. Yeah. Now that it's a great segue into our next topic, which I've like deemed toxic sec, which maybe is not true, but you know, in the past and what I've seen over the years is that, you know, the InfoSec community is it's very clicky, like in many ways, and people have deemed it to be fairly toxic. I've seen people on Twitter saying, I'm out of this space, it's so horrible, everyone's just mean, all these different things. So what has been your experience? Obviously, like, from your story, it sounds like you've met a bunch of fantastic people, but I'm sure there's obviously not always been the case. And even having a mentor that got upset, but people are human, right? They have emotions, and
Yeah.
I've seen that happen a lot. Someone trains you up for a year, they expect you to come work full time, but you've just given them the keys to the kingdom, right? So
Yeah.
it's really hard
Yeah.
as well. So you just need to, So in general, like, how have you seen like the community in general from being like a positive side / toxic side? Or maybe it's not toxic, maybe there's just like a lot of kind of negativity around that topic. So
I would say that I've definitely got to experience both sides. So I've done a lot of stuff within OWASP communities, and I find them safer than the general InfoSec community. I have found, so not that every single person I've ever met from OWASP is a completely perfect human with zero flaws,
yes.
but on average, I've found them a lot more friendly, a lot more, I think the word's generous, and like really wanting to bring you into the fold, being really happy to see you and that you're there, and encouraging. But I have definitely had like a bunch of not so awesome situations. Like I've had 3 rounds of extremely intense harassment on social media. One where someone actually showed up to my OWASP meetup to come and physically confront me. And like this man shows up and he's super furious with me. But we talked it out, and also like all the OWASPers of my chapter were around me, so I felt very safe that nothing was going to escalate too badly. And by the end, he apologized and hugged me, but it's still scary. And so this summer, I had to call the police because a bunch of people had created a Reddit page so that they could harass me better, so they could improve their harassment skills, and they were trying to figure out where I live. And in Canada, if you own a corporation, if you don't have a building for your corporation, they put your home address on the internet. Yeah, which is bullcrap. Anyway, so I pay extra every year to have another location as my business's location, so my home address isn't on the internet. And I remember my lawyer saying, like, that's just not necessary, Tanya. Like, I think you're overthinking this. And then I showed him what happened, and he was like, oh my God, why do you agree to have this shit job? Sorry, swear words.
It's fine. This is technically it's a friendly stream. I wouldn't say it's a family friendly stream. So
Okay.
yeah, so you're all good.
Okay. Good. Yeah, I've also had like some situations that were just plain like, are you an alien? Like, this is so obviously not appropriate. Like, I have formed many communities now of my own, and I remember like another person calling me like by surprise, and like she was angry with me about something, and she was like yelling at me, and I didn't know she recorded the conversation, and then she edited it, and then she started playing it for other women, saying, "Isn't Tanya mean?"
Oh
And I
no.
found out because a woman called me and told me, and she's like, and it's really obviously edited. Like she did a crappy job of editing it. And she's like, and she still sounds awful. And you sound like you're afraid of this woman that's yelling at you. And she's like, that probably wasn't a great call, was it? I'm like, no, it was not. And we had to we voted, and eventually we asked her to leave our community, because that was the beginning of much explosiveness. And like, this is a person that has 5 figures Twitter followers. And I'm not going to name the person because
Sure.
I don't run around talking trash about people. I do my job. And life's easier when you don't do those things. Right. And so I've seen people like do weird things like that. And I just pretend I don't know that person and just move on because I don't want to feed the flames. And also, like, I have more important work to do, like writing my next blog post or making sure I practice my talk for the 45th time or whatever it is. And I was like, oh, I'm not in high school anymore, so I don't have to do those things. But I've seen stuff like that. And like when I was a pen tester, especially, I really saw that. So at first I was junior, and everyone kind of treated me like an adorable mascot. I was the first woman that I met in our city that did pen testing and contracting and consulting in that space. And then I started getting good at it. And there was a contract that came out, and I won it instead of someone else. And then it was on. And then I started hearing from clients that they're like, Tanya's not experienced, like she doesn't know what she's doing. She doesn't validate her results and like other things. And I was like, that person is so nice to me to my face. And they're telling clients not to hire me. And I was like, oh. And the contracting company explained, okay, so that's because a lot of them, so I didn't know this, Lewis, and this is a thing that definitely happens in some cities. I don't know if it happens in all cities, but when companies hire a pen tester, they have no idea if you're good at what you do or not. And so what some pen testers were doing that I had known is they would bill for 10 days and they'd just run like a quick burp scan and an SS scan and copy and paste it to a Word document and send it. But when I did 10 days, I would do 10 full days. And I was like, let's do a threat model. I'm going to come back and scan again to see if you applied those patches we talked about. Let's do an architecture diagram. Blah. And I was like a spaz at them, an AppSec spaz. And they're like, we just got so much more work from Tanya for the same price. And so the consulting company is like, everyone's like, why can't you get that much done in 10 days? And I was like, I didn't mean to throw a gauntlet down or anything, but I can't just say I did 10 days if I only did 3. That's fraud.
Yep.
And I was like, oh, that's fraud. Oh, and so like, not all of them, but some of them were doing that. And I was like, oh, yeah. And they would just say, oh, I'm just faster than everyone else. And that's why I can charge that. I'm like, well, so yeah. So then all of a sudden, like people who were doing that, like the bad ones were saying bad things. And I was like, I took it as a compliment because they felt finally that I was competition, if that makes sense. But it's so petty. Software developers, I've never had a software developer run around gossiping about other software developers. I've never had one of them like run around and it's so nuts. Like I went on a couple of dates with another pen tester, which was a disaster, not because like, I don't know, you go on a couple of dates and then sometimes you get along and sometimes you don't, but because the person gossiped to every InfoSec person that would listen that they'd been on a few dates with me. And I was just like, what? And throughout my career, like working only with software developers, most of my friends being I dated many a software developer. I never had one run around and tell people that we're dating. I was like, what is wrong with you? Are you like 12 years old? Like,
it's a weird way to get InfoSec clout. That's not the way to do it.
It's not the way I want to get clout. No. And I was just like, oh my gosh, like, and it was like a millisecond years and years and years ago. And still once in a while people are like, do you know this person? I was like, no, we've never met. I just like can't deal with this anymore. Like we went on a couple dates, like calm down, bud. Yeah. So it's like really a very different, yeah. And I have to say that a few times I've thought like, sometimes I wish I could go back to software development where everyone was just so much more chill. Like, I don't mean that software developers are perfect. That's not what I'm saying. I just felt like my personality fit in better there. And so that's why like I'm so attracted to OWASP and AppSec, because you just hang out with devs 90% of your day. You're just like, hey, what's up? Let's look at code. And for me, like I was like, I fit in there best of all the different security areas.
Gotcha. So we're going to segue now into communities. We talked about the maybe toxic side, but you know, that, and obviously there are great things as well. I just think it's kind of good to start a conversation off on the hot takes, and then we can move into the wholesome side at the end, kind of thing. So you have, and I also want to, you talked about like conference talks. Sorry. Trainings being expensive. I'd like to dig into that later too, but we'll save it for a little bit later. So you've helped push forward like different chapters, like you did. You've been involved with OWASP Ottawa, DevSlop, and like WOSEC. Could you like talk about how those things kind of began and how you got involved?
Absolutely. So OWASP Ottawa existed long before me, and it was run by Sharif Kusa, and he's still one of my mentors and friends. He's awesome, awesome human being. And basically, this guy named Nadeem Duba, who's also great, I had hired him to do some security work for the company I was working at. And I think he could tell, like, I want to know everything. I want to learn so much. So he'd be like, hey, check this out. And I'd like run off and read it and be really excited. And so after maybe 2 weeks, he's like, hey, so I'm going to give a workshop that's free tonight at, I can't remember, it was like at the library or something. And he's like, I don't know if you want to like come join. I was like, oh yeah. And so we did a buffer overflow and I was like, this is amazing. And he said, well, like OWASP meets every month. Like you could come to our meetups. It's free. I'm like, this is free. And so I joined and then we started talking, and Sharif always had this rule, and I've used this rule for community too, like the community's ours. It's not just the leaders community.
100%.
But if you want something to be part of the community, if you'll do the work, you can have it. And so after like a few meetups, I said, I've heard this thing called a capture the flag contest. I'm really interested in this. Could we run one? And Sharif's like, yeah, if you'll do the work, like if you'll lead this, yeah, absolutely. And so I led it for 4 years and we did a whole bunch of them. And then a woman named Jen took over and she actually would build the system. She's incredible, but I digress. And so we started this thing where if you want the thing, if you do the work, you can have the thing. So I started booking all these different speakers and different topics and workshops about stuff I really wanted to learn. And it turned out lots and lots of other people were interested in that too. So then one day, I think for some reason I was looking at the global OWASP AppSec conference and I was like, wow, wouldn't that be cool to go? And he's like, do you want to go? And I'm like, yeah, but money. And he's like, well, did you know chapter leaders get in free? And I was like, oh, I didn't know that. I'm like, well, maybe one day I'll be a chapter leader. And he's like, Tanya, you've been a chapter leader since the day you started. Every day you have been a leader, every single day. And so guess what? I'm going to sign the papers and make it official and you're going. And I was like, what? And so he went too. So I wasn't alone because I don't know, traveling internationally by yourself, it's a little scary. And so we both went and he was awesome. And like, I ended up meeting people that I'd only met on the internet before. And so then I went to like all of them for the next few years. Yeah, so then eventually we trained our own leaders. And so I feel like communities can start just by having 2 people that want to meet up and inviting other people to join. So when I started WOSEC, I had gone to Israel, and in Israel, they have this group called Cyber Ladies. And obviously I had to go to one of their meetups. I'm like, a whole bunch of ladies are into cyber, sign me up. And they said, you should have stuff too. And I was like, okay, so Israel has like a huge cybersecurity industry, and like you can go to university and learn cyber. We didn't have that in Canada at the time. And I was like, so you have like thousands of cyber ladies. We have tens of cyber ladies. And they're like, we totally encourage you to do it. And so I called my friend Donna and I was like, hey, Donna, like I went to this thing and it was so amazing. And meetups, like it's $50 for an account for like 6 months. And I was like, what if we try to start a meetup and basically you and I will just have brunch once a month for 6 months. And if after 6 months, every month, no other women come, then you and I will stop bothering to pay for the meetup and we'll just keep having brunch. And she's like, I'm in, I can handle this level of commitment. And so then we held our first lunch and I emailed everyone, all the women I knew, and so did she. And we like put little things on the internet and 22 women showed up. And we were so loud that the restaurant was like, hey, do you want to have your own private room next month? Because you ladies are giggling and laughing so hard, you're making all the other customers jealous, which was awesome. And so, yeah, we ended up having around like 30 women almost every month. And so I started like posting pictures and talking about it. And then this woman from Kenya named Judy, who's absolutely amazing, she wrote me and she's like, hey, can we do that in Kenya? I'm like, oh, yeah, you can. And so in Kenya, it's really hard to find space, but I was working at Microsoft. So Microsoft Kenya made a space for them. And so they started doing it in Kenya. And then a woman wrote me in Vancouver, and another one in Montreal, and then one in France. And then before I knew it, we had chapters all around the world, and we had to make like a formal board and become a nonprofit. And it was just really, really amazing to see the joy that we could bring to other humans, and also the power of us working together. So for instance, a woman moved from France to Montreal. Well, obviously the chapter leader for Montreal is like, I can't wait to have you. And like having like basically a welcoming committee, if that makes sense. When she moved, like moving to a new continent's kind of scary. and they welcomed her with open arms. And so like just all these amazing things came out of it. Like a bunch of them started a business together. A bunch of them started another nonprofit together.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, there are things that we could work on together. Like there was a woman who was being sexually harassed at work. And then I happened to know the head of marketing that worked there. And with her permission, I told her what happened. And she went into the man's office who had done it and like tore him a new asshole. She was just like, if you ever do that again, you're going to be so fired. You will never work again. I am not kidding. What you did was absolutely unacceptable. And she's like, do not do that. And she's like, yeah, the guy is really nice now. He doesn't ask to do things to me, and life is so much better. And he always insists on having someone else in the meetings with us because he'd always insist on us meeting alone, which was terrifying. And everything's great now. And so like different people using connections and not realizing that the power that we have if we advocate for each other and share with each other. And so I feel like community, it's not a thing where you're like, oh, I need a job, so I'm going to go to the OWASP meetup this one time and demand everyone find me a job.
Mm-hmm.
It's going for several months, meeting people that end up being a part of your life for the long term, and it being a give and take thing rather than I'm just going to show up and try to take and then leave again. If you find the right community for you, you want to stay. You look forward to it each month or each 6 months or whenever the thing is. And like, you want to talk to those people. Like when COVID started, my WOSAC chapter in Victoria, we closed down because we tried having virtual ones and it was weird. But one day my co-leader said, well, we have each other's phone numbers. Like we all know each other now. We could just hang out. We don't need to have a formal meetup. And so then we just kept all being friends. And so that went pretty darn well. Yeah.
Very cool. That's obviously there's obviously a lot of takeaways from there. Like the field in itself is pretty small, and obviously that's why it's like very powerful to like kind of have that kind of collaboration between people. If it obviously helps you in like, you know, very unfortunate situations or like more,
Yeah.
you know, professional job kind of escalation kind of things. I remember like when I first got my first job, I actually started to go to OWASP Leeds, and it was like in, you know, in the UK, it was like kind of small, but I used to just go there and I didn't really know what I was talking about most of the time. And that's, you know, I basically met a bunch of people from a certain company and I just kept talking to them. They thought I was cool, you know, thankfully some people think I'm cool, so that's nice. And then it led to basically like when I had the interview, I basically already had the job. They just, the owner just wanted to make sure I wasn't a widow. So that was like the whole kind of like, you know, outcome from going to OWASP events, like making yourself known. And I think that's kind of like really important to like building out, you know, a good network so you can get a, you know, opportunities for like jobs. Yeah.
For sure. I also like throughout this time, I learned about advocating for other people. So for instance, my first professional mentor, so he was really great until we had the fight and he wouldn't talk to me. So he was wonderful. And so I remember there was a job I was applying for and they wanted him to do consulting. And I had applied for it and I had actually done a free pen test for them. And then I had remediated all the things I found in the pen test. Like I had been trying everything to get this like full-time pen testing job. And so when he did his interview, he said, well, I'm only coming if Tanya comes. Wow. And the guy's like, oh, well, she doesn't have that much experience. He's like, well, I'm mentoring her on the side. You want her. Plus she does all the crappy work I don't like. Like she'll run the scanner and she'll still be excited and think it's not dull. She'll be the one that writes the report and makes sure my grammar's good. Like just get her. Okay. Or I'm not coming. I have lots of job offers. I don't need to come here. Bring Tanya. And like, who does that for someone? Right? Like that's amazing. And so one day I realized that I had more things that I could share. So for instance, like Microsoft would pay for my hotel. So sometimes I would know another woman was coming and that she was paying for herself. And I'm like, do you want to stay in my hotel room? We could share. Microsoft's paying. Don't tell them.
Yeah. We'll delete
so,
that.
but like I would, and so for instance, like when I'm on a podcast, sometimes after I'll say like, hey, there's this woman I've been mentoring. She's really awesome. Like maybe you could consider her as a guest for your podcast. And sometimes they say yes. right? And so I figured out, like, if I'm going to work so hard to open the door for myself to go through, like, maybe I could bring one or two other people with me. And
Yeah.
so by us advocating for people, like, sometimes you don't realize just how much power you have. So for instance, like, I have a lot of friends now that do training, and I do training too. That's why. So it might seem silly. We're all competitors, but we're all friends. Like,
Yeah.
I'll throw work to other people because I know they're really good at what they do, and I don't cover those things. And
Exactly.
so, so sometimes I'll ask, like, the day or two before the conference, I'm like, is your training completely sold out? Like, do you have an extra seat that you haven't sold? And if so, like, I know this person who would just like cut off one of their digits to be able to be in your class, but they don't have like their company support. Like, if you have, and they're like, of course, yeah, send her in, right?
Yeah.
And so, like, if you have a class for 20 people and you've only sold 16 seats, like, what are you going to do with those extra 4 seats, right? And so a lot of times they just say yes, and you don't know if you don't ask. And then I just do a favor for that person later, right? And all of these things result in a lot of good karma, essentially.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
I've definitely seen that myself. In the even when I was like in my consulting days, it was like, well, we don't have a training for that, but we do know this great person who does. So like, just go and talk to them basically. And then, even it was interesting, like to kind of like flash back into um when I went to Tel Aviv. I went to one of I think the secure coding training there for like Node.js, and I think there was a lot of like open seats there that ended up getting used in that capacity as well. And you are right. Like from what I could tell, I think the women that I met there, most of them were either from like the government or like from the military background, and they were then actually like training there too, which was wild to me because I've noticed that more like being in the States at least now, but it was not really a thing that I used to see in the UK. So it's like really interesting to see how much like OWASP and like these types of events have actually like it's not just for someone in a private industry. It's now it's now like also like for like the government and those types of things too.
So for OWASP events, there's a little group of us that have been giving free training for women for many years. And
Hmm.
so Vandana Verma, Nicole Becker, Nancy Garishe, and then sometimes I help. And basically, like, they've been giving training at these events for women only for free to try to bring more women into our industry. And like, the 3 of them have been
Hmm.
doing it for years. And they don't ask for anything. They're just like, come and learn and then go get a job, Missy. And
It's
like,
gonna pay
that's
back.
really,
It's always
yeah.
going to pay back because you train people up or you teach people the ways of the infosec path, and
Yeah.
when they when like you gave that training for free now, they're going to in 10-15 years they're going to be like in very powerful positions in companies anyway, and they'll go, you know what,
Mhm.
that person was fantastic, let's pay them now like x amount of money. So obviously I know it's not that entire incentive to do that. I think it's a great thing to do in general, but it always pays
Mhm.
back from what I've seen. If you're nice to people and like you do all those different things, there's definitely returns from from that space.
Mhm. I
Yeah.
agree.
So I want to talk about Cyber Mentoring Monday. We're recording this on a Monday, but this will not premiere until Thursday. So I saw it go out this morning. But can you talk about why you started using that hashtag? Like, how's it been like positive for people? Yeah.
So I credit my professional mentors for helping me get to where I am today. And all of them help me with something. And sometimes it's the introduction, sometimes it's the read this book, all these different things. And so I started having people message me and say, will you mentor me? And so I started mentoring 4 women who are all so incredible. Um, and but people would ask me, well, can you be my mentor? And I was like, well, no, I can't, because I'm mentoring 4 different people already. And then I'll be a crappy mentor because I'll never have any time for them. And but I don't know how to explain this, but I was like, oh, but you still need one. What are we gonna do? And so then I put out a thread where I said, so I can't mentor everyone. And also I'm not the right mentor for everyone.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I'm
Okay.
not the correct mentor for everyone. I'm not like, people aren't going to want necessarily what I want. They're going to want to learn skills I don't know, etc. Right? So I put out this thing that said, hey, if you are looking for a mentor, post here what you're looking for. And if you're someone who's open to mentoring someone else, like you have something to teach, please post here. And then let's try to match people. And I'd already tried doing a mentoring program for OWASP in person. And I figured out I suck at matching people, and that's okay. I have many other skills. I'm not a matchmaker, and that's fine. But I figured out, we did like a speed dating mentor matching thing where each mentor would say like, I'm good at these things. And, I'm up for mentoring 1 or 2 people. And so we all did that, and I did it. And then I had 4 people want me to mentor them. And I was like, me? I'm just starting. Like, and they're like, well, you're just starting InfoSec, but you've worked in tech for almost 20 years, right? Like there's some stuff in that head we'd like to look at. And so basically I was very surprised, and it was wonderful. And so all of us like took home like some relationships, like email addresses, and met up and stuff with varying levels of success. But I was like, that took forever to plan for one night. And I was like, what could I do that would scale? So at Microsoft, I'd always talk about like, that's cool, you did that thing. How can we make it scale? That'd be like a question that our bosses would ask a lot. And so I started thinking like that. And so, so I did this thread, and there was like 500 comments. I couldn't even keep track of it. I'm like, I'm going to break LinkedIn. And so, so then I was like, oh, well, what if I just do it every week? And so at first it was #MentoringMonday. And then some scientific people started using the same #MentoringMonday. And then some other people, so there's a bunch of areas of science that started using it. And then there was like Black women business owners started using Mentoring Monday too, which was cool. And then a marketing company got a hold of it, and they saw how popular it was. And they would put like 150 posts every Monday, and they just drowned everyone. So no one could find each other. And I felt like really angry, because I'm like, yo, we're doing this community thing. And then like, you jerks, like, just anyway, I wrote them, and I was like, yeah, they're just like trying to sell a thing, and then Mentoring Monday. So I asked everyone, what should we name it? And so we voted, and they voted on CyberMentoringMonday, even though I was like, well, the cyber word's kind of silly. Like, we call ourselves InfoSec. And the argument was, new people know the word cyber. We want the new people use the accessible word. And so then we changed it to CyberMentoringMonday. And so there have been multiple podcasts dedicated to CyberMentoringMonday. So at one point there were 2 at the same time, and now there's just 1 every single Monday. There's people that have meetups around it. And so every Monday I share it on Twitter and now on Mastodon, where basically I just say, it's CyberMentoringMonday. Do you want to give back to our industry and take someone under your wing? Reply to this and say, what topics you know. And then also, if you're looking to join our industry, or you're looking to change, it could be like a subtopic, to go from AppSec to forensics or something, or it could be a completely new career for you. Say what you're looking for. And then it's funny, because people will see like a couple of tweets, and then they'll see nothing. Yeah, because they're in direct messages now. And like, they're meeting each other, and they're on Zoom, or they're emailing, or whatever. And so I have had so many people come up to me and say wonderful things. So for instance, this one guy who works at a stereo company, and I love these stereos, but I'm not going to name them. But anyway, he's like, hey, I'm Jesse, and I work at this place, and I want to buy you a coffee. And I was like, okay, bye. And he's like, I responded to that a year ago. And basically, I met this young person who, had been working in IT for a year, and I started mentoring her. And after 6 months, my boss was like, hey, let's hire a junior AppSec person. And he's like, I think we both know who you want. And so he's like, so we hired her 6 months ago. She's so amazing. And I would never have found her if it wasn't for this. And so then he gave me a discount so I bought a new stereo, which was awesome. But like, he's like, this is just so great. Like, that, he's like, I didn't expect to get anything out of it when I did it. And now I have like my favorite hire of all time. And so there's lots of stories like that, where people became friends, where people, I'm sure that there are romantic tales that came out of it, but the idea is professional relationships. But yeah, just like a lot of really happy stories. Even if you just meet up with someone and talk with them about a thing, and you figure out that's not the thing for you, you've just saved a ton of time. Like, I spent a year and a half learning pen testing because I didn't know AppSec existed. Well, actually, I spent like a year and a half learning it. then another year and a half working in it to figure out, oh no, I was supposed to do AppSec. That's where I was always supposed to be because I'm a social butterfly, and because like pen testers have to have such attention to detail. They have to be extraordinarily determined and patient. I'm not those things. I am like, hi everyone, I'm going to add scanners to your CI/CD and smash stuff. Who wants to watch? And that's okay, right? Like we need people that do both jobs. And if I had known that AppSec existed, I don't know if I would have just immediately gone for that, right? Like basically one day Sharif was like, the reason why you're having so much trouble with your boss with pen testing is because you keep doing AppSec, but he's trying to pay you to do pen testing, sweetie. You keep threat modeling and doing all these other things and spending more time at each client site, and the client's happy, and that's nice, but your boss pays for pen testing, not for AppSec. And so what if you got a job doing the thing that you actually keep doing? Then maybe your boss would be happy with you instead of frustrated, like, Tanya, stop calling the clients, the thing's over. And I feel bad for that boss in some ways.
No, I get it. There's definitely been places where I've gone and done way too much out of the scope of what we should have done. So I definitely can resonate with what you're with what you're saying there. So there's a lot of things that we will not be able to cover today. I'm looking at the time, but I would love to kind of like dive into something that's on your, at least on my side, on the right-hand side, the wonderful book on your right-hand side. So you obviously have released a book called Alice and Bob Learn Security. You know, I'm sure there were a lot of things that people probably don't know about, like how to write a book in general. Like, what are the actual like, you know, avenues you probably have to go? Because I people would assume, oh, you just put, you know, you type things that you know, and then it goes into a book, and ta-da, you can now sell this thing for money. But I'm sure it's a lot more than just typing things on the keyboard. So like, what were the things that you know would need to know to kind of like, if you were to go again from scratch, like what are the things that you were like, oh, I didn't know this, or yeah.
Well, I'm actually writing my second book now, so I'm definitely applying the things I learned. So first of all, I didn't decide to write a book. I got persuaded into writing a book, which is not the usual way of things. So I was doing lots of conference talks at lots of places. And at Microsoft, I was on a team of all developer advocates. And so there was approximately 100 of us. And there's this one named Brock, and he's so awesome. And this is going to sound really silly, but he dared all of us to start a blog. He's like, I know all of you are good at speaking, but I dare you to write a blog. And if you write a blog, you know, once a month for 4 months, and you don't have at least 40 readers, I think he offered like, I'll buy you dinner. And I was like, it's on like Donkey Kong, Brock. I'm like, I'm going to prove him so wrong. So I started writing, and it turned out I loved writing. I just loved it. And by the time I hit 4 posts, I had way more than 40 readers. And I just loved it. I don't know how to explain, but I'd figure out and learn a new thing. I'd be like, I need to tell everyone about this new security header I learned about, or whatever the thing was I was excited about. I'm like, I need to tell everyone about this. And so I just started writing more and more blogs, and they weren't necessarily always superbly on topic. Like I had a blog about how to travel and still get good sleep, and what types of snacks that are ideal for going through airport security. And not everyone maybe cares about that, but turns out you shouldn't bring poke bowls through. So anyway,
Okay.
I learned that the hard way. Don't do that. But I just guess I figured I really liked writing. And so then a couple of people wrote me and were like, are you going to write a book? And I was like, why would I write a book? And they're like, could you keep writing? And I was like, oh no, I don't know enough to write a book. And so then publishers started writing me, and I was like, what are you talking about? Like, and it just seemed so confusing. Like, it's like someone saying, hey, do you want to fly this plane? I don't know how to fly a plane. Like, I don't know how to write a book. And so then I met with Jim Minitel from Wiley, and he's very good. And he was like, Tanya, so you learned AppSec, right? I'm like, no, I'm still learning it. I don't know all of it yet. I'm working on it. And he's like, what book do you wish you could have had when you started? Because there's no book, Tanya. There's that awesome book by Laura Bell about secure agile development. There's that book by Julian, and it's about, you know, securing kind of agile SDLC stuff. And those are good books, but those are the only English books I've ever found on AppSec. There's no like AppSec book. And I was like, oh, I can't. And he's like, just think about what it would be. So maybe we could find someone to write it. And so I started thinking about it, and I started obsessing about it. And then I started like planning things. And then I asked my Twitter followers, like, hey, I'm thinking of covering these things, like what would be missing? And then I had this whole plan, and Jim's like, so want to sign something that says you're actually gonna do it? And I was like, he's like, it's a lot of work. And I'm like, okay. And so I was like, well, the worst thing that could happen is that I don't finish. And that happens with a lot of authors. They just don't finish, right?
Mhm.
And so I did what works for me, and I told everyone I was doing it. And I told everyone so I couldn't not do it, because they all know. This might sound silly, but when I was like a teenager, I had this person I was dating, and I was going to break up with them. So I told my best friend, I'm going to do this. And she's like, why are you telling me? I'm like, so that you make fun of me mercilessly if I back out. Because then I know I have to do it, because I told you I was going to do it. And if not, there'll be silly consequences of you teasing me until I do it, because we know I should be with this other 17-year-old person. And like, we know that it's done, and we know I should do it. So I'm telling you I'm going to do it. And then she's like, you can do this. It's going to really suck, but you could do it. And so then I did it, and then I cried a lot. But anyway, the point is that she knew. And so if I didn't do it, I couldn't call her, because she would be like, Tanya. And so I just told everyone on Twitter, like, I'm writing this book and I'm doing this, so that people will be like, how's it going? I'm like, oh man, I'm so behind. I better work on that. I can't let them down. And so if you can have an accountability partner, and in my case, it was all of Twitter, but you might want to be more private and have it be a friend. So that really helped. And I wrote out for both books, like, this is what I want to cover. And then I asked all my followers. So all my followers are like brilliant. Like, they're just so smart, Lewis.
Mhm.
And so I wrote them, I'm like, here's what I'm thinking of covering. And then they came up with 5 things that I felt were super missing and definitely had to be there. And then a couple of things where I'm like, okay, I'll briefly mention that, but like, we added like 5 new topics completely to the book because of all those smart people. And
Yep.
especially if more than one person. So someone was like, what about trusted types? I'm like, and then I went and I saw Lewis speak at Sec for Dev in Austria. And guess what he talked about?
So,
Trusted types. I was like,
Lucas. Lucas.
Lucas.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I said your name.
Yeah.
I'm
No, no,
sorry.
it's good. We don't look that
Yeah.
similar, but we probably might look a little bit.
Well, you're both awesome at security headers. So there's that.
Yeah.
But so he talked about trusted types, which was great. And so I feel like if you can ask your peers in whatever way makes sense to you, to make sure that the topics you're going to cover are comprehensive, but also matter to people. Because I don't want to write a chapter on stuff no one cares about. Right.
Yep.
So I also asked, like, is there stuff you feel shouldn't be in here? And everyone was like, no, I think those things are good. But I had chosen a bunch of frameworks and programming languages, and people were like, no, yank this one, add this one. This one's actually significantly more popular than that one. And for instance, I was thinking of including Go, and a lot of people explain Go's awesome, but it's actually not that popular. And
Yep.
so although it would be helpful for the small percentage of people that love Go, you're trying to write a book for everyone, not
I
for a
see.
small subset of awesome humans. You want for as many people as possible. So maybe you could write a blog post about Go, but I don't know, because you're only allowed so many pages in a book.
That makes sense. So what I've heard so far, it's like external persuasion into external accountability into you know, external feedback to building out something that actually is then going to resonate with people. It's kind of how I
Yeah.
like realized that stuff. Okay, very
And
cool.
also schedule a time for yourself to write. So every Saturday and Sunday morning, I write. And so if I'm traveling somewhere, if I'm not on the airplane for a long time, I also write. And so as a result, I'm like, oh, it's Sunday morning, time to write. It's like a habit, if that makes sense. And
Yep.
whether I write a blog post or I am switching out my Google Analytics for a different, more privacy focused one, which happens to be what happened this weekend.
Okay.
But it's like, I'm going to write a thing
Mm,
on the weekend in the morning. And so if you can
interesting.
create a habit around something, like whether it be Thursday evenings or Monday mornings or whatever it is, if you're always supposed to do that, then you will always have progress. And it can be really stressful if you stop writing for a month or two, and then you start again, like the longer you don't do it, the more you don't do it, the easier it is.
100%.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so even if you, I remember I read a thing by Stephen King where he said, just write something. It doesn't matter if it completely sucks for the first month. It's that you want to have the habit of writing and writing and writing. And then one day you're going to hit a topic and suddenly you have a story in a book, and just keep writing. And it doesn't matter if you only write like half a page, you wrote something, you did something, you're on track. And it's like, oh, yeah. And sometimes I have to write, I find the first couple paragraphs of each chapter the absolute most difficult things to write for whatever reason. And so I rewrite them a lot. But once I can start writing the next part, I'm like, I'm in.
That makes a lot of sense, because I've, you know, the way that I would probably like think about this in my head is like, you know, if you want to talk about why application security important, just type application is security, it's important because, and then eventually like the next thing will come, or you'll change the thing at the beginning like 17 times until then you can move on to the next piece. That's generally how we have 1 minute remaining, but I have one question which I think related to books. Like at the moment, like is it public knowledge about your second book yet, or is that still, you know, private
It's
behind?
it's
Okay.
public knowledge.
So you
that I'm
mentioned
starting.
the topic, is the topic known?
Yes,
Okay,
it's
cool.
Alice and Bob Learn Secure Coding.
So that's based on that, like obviously getting people interested into listening to or like reading about like secure coding is actually really hard. I would say like the fundamentals of application security are definitely a lot more digestible from a reading perspective, I would say. Maybe not in the same regard, but like writing code obviously is a different beast. So what are the types of things you're trying to do to make that more like digestible for people?
Okay, so I'm going to do a lot of the same things I did in my first book. So I'm going to make a physical book, an ebook, and an audio book, because some of us are better at listening than
Yep.
sitting still. I'm not awesome at sitting still. And then on top of that, I try to teach things in different ways. So I read a lot about learning because I'm dyslexic. And so as an adult, I learned French. And for dyslexic people, that is super hard. So I attended the one and only school in Canada that teaches dyslexic adults new languages. And it's called Alliance Française. But anyway, so then how do I word this? So I have stories of Alice and Bob and how these security things affect their lives. Then we'll have some code or the technical specification. And then sometimes I tell a story and then I try to have an example or a diagram. And I don't do that for every single topic. It depends on how difficult the topic is. So for instance, when I did CICD in Alice and Bob Learn AppSec, first of all, I had a diagram. And I explained all the things in the diagram of like how a CI/CD works. And then I like explained with words how it works. And then I also had like the technical definitions. And I remember one of my technical editors said, well, this is the third time you're explaining what CI/CD is, and you're just doing it in a new way, Tanya. Like just, you should delete the second two. They already learned it. Like, that's just it. It's a highly complex and abstract concept, which is very difficult for people to fully to understand and apply. And it's important to me that people read this book and they not only understand it, they feel like they could apply the knowledge. If they're like, oh, theoretically communism works, but they've never seen any examples of it, so they know it's actually pretty darn hard to get it right, then they might just run off and be like, we should do communism. And I'm not saying that capitalism is perfect by any means, but what I mean is that it can be a lot more complex than we realize if we just read a definition. And I really want people to be able to start doing application security when they're done. And so it's important to me to do the very important topics 3 times in 3 completely different ways to get it across. And so basically I was trying really, really hard to make it accessible and easy to understand, and whenever possible, amusing. And I remember someone saying to me, you know, I started reading your book Friday night and I finished it Sunday and I just couldn't stop. I never thought I would snort laugh reading a textbook. This was actually quite fun. Thank you for the weekend. And I was like, and so I want Alice and Bob Learn Secure Coding to be the same. So I'm adding more characters from the Alice and Bob series. So Alice and Bob were born in 1998, and they were two characters that cryptographers used to explain cryptography to all of us civilians who are not mathematician geniuses. And they're like, Alice wants to tell Bob a secret. But how can Bob tell it was Alice that said that? How can Alice know that the secret wasn't changed when it was sent to Bob? And so I was a co-op student 24 years ago. And basically, I remember them explaining the SSL handshake to me using Alice and Bob. And this was my fourth job in IT at this point, but I'd never heard of SSL at that point. And I was just like, oh, okay, I get it. Like I immediately understood because they use these characters and use pictures to explain how it goes back and forth and everything. And then I helped them create an SSL accelerator at age 21. So that went pretty well, right? And so I feel like if you can explain a very complex topic in as many ways as possible and breaking it down into pieces as much as possible, people will have a better time learning it. And it might sound odd, but when I was young, I learned to play guitar, and it took me over 2 years before I could just play a song and have it be recognizable by another human as that song. And then I had this friend named Luke, and the first time he picked up a guitar, he just started playing it, and then we turned on the radio and he just played along to the radio. He'd been playing an hour and a half of his life. I'd been playing for over 2 years and I couldn't do that. And it sounds funny, but years later, Luke was a terrible guitar teacher because he'd be like, Tanya, just do this. What's wrong with you? Because for him, it's so effortless and easy. And I ended up giving guitar lessons at work because I'm that weird person that needs to fill her lunchtime. And everyone's like, oh, you're such a good guitar teacher. I'm like, because it was so hard for me to learn this. And so I feel like if you have really struggled to learn something, once you've like mastered that topic, it might be easier for you to teach other people because you had to look at it from 5 angles to finally be like, I know this and I can apply this confidently. Yeah.
So I think the TLDR from what I'm hearing is everyone learns in different ways, and some people take a lot longer to grasp a concept than others. So if you can give people a wide net to learn from, which are in very easy to understand chunks, hopefully that they will come out to a better conclusion. I think that's a great place to stop. So thank you so much for this is a great story from where you began, the communities, and like how things have like drove you to where you are today, how you've essentially like kind of amped up a lot of other people in this industry too. And you're building content that realistically is helping other people truly understand this field today. So thank you for joining today. This has been great. And yeah, this was episode 20.
Thank you, Lewis.